Hello, hello. Make sure to mute yourself if you're not speaking. Just a reminder, I forgot that before we went live. Okay, if you are tuning in, welcome. This is the monthly live Big Miracle Energy Patreon channel discussion. We would love for you to just follow along and share where the Spirit guides us today. And yeah, today we're going to talk about judgment in the I know mind. And I guess I kind of want to just call on the people that brought this up. So I'm going to start with Tommy. And if you just want to share a little about what you were seeing in the place of judgment, and then we'll kind of start the discussion from there.
Yeah, so I've been noticing a lot lately where I'm putting judgment because I know that when I judge, it's a judgment on myself. And no matter what I judge, whether it be a person or an event or a circumstance, it's something within me that I'm taking personal and that I'm seeing as something that I need to work on, because everything is a mirror reflection of of myself in my mind. So trying to navigate that is where I was going with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like the $1 million question. When Patrick and I were kind of talking about this before, it's like that's the answer to all, right? As soon as we get rid of judgment is when we step back into truth, is when, perception isn't there and it just is the oneness. So I think it's the never ending, not never ending, but the continuous feat of the release of forgiveness, that release at the level of mind that's not even happening. And that the Bible verse that's down below the course says, that's shared because what it's really telling you is that if I judge Tommy, I've made Tommy real. Therefore, I have to be real, right? So you can't like pick and choose who. And then what I hear like you saying, Tommy, is that you've done so much work of unwinding that now the ego's like, oh, Tommy won't let me just judge Tommy. So I got to figure out like new ways to judge Tommy without it seeming like I'm judging Tommy. Is that what you're feeling?
Yeah, no, exactly. And what I tend to do is judge myself through another person's point of view. So instead of judging myself through like self-hate or saying, why would you do this? It's kind of for example, like what would she think, right, of something that I do or something that I say, and judging in that way.
But you know what, like the key piece is, I mean, I don't know what anybody else thinks, is if you're thinking that, as much as you don't think you're judging yourself, you have first judged yourself, or you can't even think of her or someone else having that sort of judgment. So despite you projecting it out, it originated within you to begin with.
Right.
So like when you do that and you find yourself, what are like the next steps you kind of do to be like, oh wait, okay.
So I do like to take a step back and remember that I am not a body, that I'm not like this physical form in this physical place that we can perceive, and that we are in spirit and there is no judgment in spirit, and spirit views everything as just is. And I did share a Bible verse with you yesterday, and I feel like that summed it up very well in many different ways, where it's just essentially you're judging yourself, and that's why we shouldn't judge others, as in,
Yeah. No, I love that. And thank you for like clarifying deeper and like allowing me to ask some questions so we can get like a better idea where we're at. The thing that popped in my mind yesterday, we were watching David, and if anybody's tuning in and isn't familiar, David Hoffmeister is who I'm referring to. He's been sharing the Course in Miracles for decades, but he was doing a movie thing, and he was talking about if you really relinquished all judgment, even of this table, and you no longer saw it as white or a table or wood or this or that, but like completely had no judgment. So none of that I know mind. The table would tell you who you are. It would whisper, "You are Christ." That's what he said. He was like, "You are Christ." Because you wouldn't have any assumptions tied to it. So it would have the freedom to do what it's meant to. And everything here is meant to be a reminder of your truth. But the problem is we've created all of these judgments and stories that keep us from it. And it was just hilarious to think like this table, if I relinquished and didn't think of it as a table or anything, would tell me my truth. Because that is its job here, but it cannot do its job when I have placed all these barriers, which are the judgments, right? I've already decided that this is a table, that I set my cup on it, that I put my computer on it, that it was built from wood, or probably not wood, it's from Amazon, so it's probably something else. But you know what I mean? Like I already have all of these preconceived notions, and if in fact this table is a projection of the mind, but I'm using the mind to predict what it is, then the mind's power can actually come through. I mean, what are your thoughts? You and I have Patrick, I feel like he tends to understand this on such a different, deeper level than me.
Like, usually bad with words though. So another like hiccup or obstacle I usually encounter, it's on this exact topic with Ashley. It's like coming from the ego, or like, let's say Ash, we're out having dinner, and this is, I don't think it's ever really happened, but this
we don't go out to dinner.
Yeah, we don't go to dinner. But like, let's just say Ashley judges the waitress, and she doesn't like her hair or outfit, and I'm like, and then I call her out for it, and like I'm thinking like, oh, I'm calling her out on her judgment, but that's me judging her, and then it becomes, that's like a paradox in the whole thing. It's like, even that is like that's them in judgment. So it's like I have to see her as being wholly perfect, and even in that aspect I shouldn't even be judging her for judging another person. So
yeah, does that make sense to everyone? Because I think it's easy, like, for your judgment or I know mind to sneak in when you feel like you're helping another. Then it makes it's okay then, right? Like, then I can use my judgment mind because I'm only helping Patrick, or Patrick's only helping me, when in fact it's another sneaky tactic of you staying in this thought system of separation and knowingness when you really know nothing. You know nothing about this illusion. And what were you saying earlier? The only thing we should know,
wholly perfect.
Know that we have the right to the kingdom.
Oh, we have the
right to
the right to the kingdom.
Yeah, the right to the kingdom.
Yeah.
Like that is like the only knowingness that, of truth, and whatever that kingdom is, you call. But I just think it's so perplexing because right now there's a group of us doing the I know mind exercise that David Hoffmeister puts on, and it's really brought up some resistance and some ego barriers, even for myself, in calling people out, because it's like this balance of holding space and needing to like make sure that space looks a certain way. Like right here, like if all of a sudden someone started saying absurd things, we would need to intervene or we need to redirect. But even that is a sense of control. That is a sense of I know mind. So it's like, where do these bounds stop and where do they start, and how do you know? And I think the biggest piece that I get from the course in that is, if you're asking the question, you've already gone down the ego lane, right? You've already there. But if you just are being guided from spirit and you stay in spirit, it just is. It just happens, right? Like you just show up and you set these boundaries and they're healthy and they're loving. Yeah, my mind right now is going down its own rabbit hole. So I would love to like push it out to anybody else who'd like to share.
Let me ask a question.
Yeah.
For that example that Patrick you gave, right? Mm-hmm. When Ashley does something, you then interject. So what's the solution there? So let's say that she's going down her own path, Is it about then being, respecting the journey that person is on and you coming from a different place? Because that will happen fairly quickly.
I think the point is, I shouldn't even actually have been able to perceive her actually judging the waitress. The fact that I was actually seeing her judge the waitress was already a indication that I was coming from the ego point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest thing. It's like, well, like everything is, you have to control like what you can control, which is yourself. So that's pretty much it. So if someone else is coming from the ego and you see it, that means that's something that you have to look internally.
Mm-hmm.
So
because you can't see the ego if you're not first coming from the ego. So it's interesting because like where we're at on the ladder is not say where David is. So when if you were to have a conversation with a person who, let's say, is at that state of the furthest state you can get within the illusion to enlightenment, ready to lay their body aside when it is time, and you're sitting here saying Patrick is a jerk, blah blah, they wouldn't see it as that. Like they wouldn't see it as attack. They can only see love. And I have so many thoughts about that, how like the Bible and Buddha and all these other not thought leaders, but enlightened individuals were interpreted in different manners because it was interpreted through the ego, and they weren't in the ego. They didn't acknowledge the ego. And the beautiful thing is when you sit with someone who doesn't acknowledge your ego, the ego wants attack, right? So when it says something from a place of attack, it is seeking attack. Have you ever tried to fight with someone and they wouldn't give it to you, and then you kind of just surrender because it's pointless? Why would you keep fighting, right? Unless like there's some major other mental, whatever emotional things occurring in that moment, but then you've turned the fight on yourself and you know that. But ultimately, when you are trying to fight and someone won't fight back, eventually your barrier goes down. Does that make sense? So like you wouldn't be able to see that that person is coming from a place of wrong because wrong does not exist. It's kind of like, so Jacob Collier, he was just introduced to me. I sent it to Kaylee and Tommy already. Constantin, can you mute for a sec, please? Lots of love. Yeah, I can hear your cough if you're going to cough. So Jacob Collier, he talks about music in this manner of like, he just doesn't see the rules. So like, I don't know a lot about music, but essentially like you're not supposed to mix F flat with the E train or whatever. Like certain things, there's rules. And he doesn't look at the rules. And he says there is no good music and there is no bad music. There's only music that aligns with you and moves you. So that's really the space you're getting to, is like there is no good, there is no bad, there just is what is being guided within, which is spirit. And then that's where then there's nothing to judge, because when Patrick judged right, he had to judge against wrong, right? So he judged against something else that he was trying to say doesn't exist, that he's trying to say doesn't bad, but he made it real. He made it worthy by judging against it. Does that make sense, Constantine, in that manner?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What are other people's thoughts?
Well, you also just gave me a thought, Ashley, about like you said that for him to judge it, he made it worthy. And I thought about that for a second, and I was like, well, don't we really only judge that which is worthy? And it kind of made me think of what we perceive to be worthy. And it kind of made me think of like the analogy that you've given me before of like someone tells me, I hate your pink hair. And like, obviously that's not going to affect me because I don't have pink hair. And they could say that all day, but like, I'm not going to care about that because it's not worthy to me. Like what they're judging it doesn't exist for me. So I feel like in the same way, it's like, really just what I was hearing is like, when we are judging or when we are perceiving ego or whatever, again, you can only perceive ego if you are in ego. And so it's kind of like, you know, I've kind of been battling with duality a lot lately, and that like everything is everywhere, and like what is what, and I can see the perspectives of everything. And so I think oftentimes I realize now, trying to label them in terms of like ego or spirit or good or bad or right or wrong or whatever, instead of just allowing things to be what they were. And so I like all of that to say that like I just think it's really beautiful how, like, for instance, when we talk about forgiveness, it allows that letting go and that like release for what actually is present to be there. And I feel like talking about this topic of judgment, that it's somewhat similar, and that like when you interesting. I feel like I just got a message from spirit that like judgment and forgiveness go hand in hand, right? I mean, they have to be. It's like two sides of the same coin almost. That like when you let go of judgment, you are having to forgive yourself for either judging that thing or for what you were judging, right? And so in that forgiveness, you allow that the Holy Spirit to now be in control of it. And like, yeah, I don't know if any of that made any sense or really what I'm saying, but yeah.
No, I think it makes sense a lot. And really what I heard you say, Cassidy, is like essentially the hand in hand, the opposite of the coins is the forgiveness is the realization, like it never actually happened. So it never actually existed. So judgment can't even exist. And I think that's the biggest piece here too, when it comes to like someone outside of you doing something that you judge, or that like you were saying, Tommy, through Kaylee's eyes you see judgment. Well, that's separation. You just made Kaylee real, and that she's separate from you, and that there's more than one person here, and there's not. There's only one mind here. So immediately, like, huge red flag that you're in the ego belief system is the second you even acknowledge something is outside of you. Yeah.
So something else you just made me think of was yesterday I spent the majority of my day at a women's conference. And at the end of it, one of the women was actually like praying over people. And when she was praying over people, like she wasn't just, I've never actually experienced, well, I mean, I've experienced it in other churches, but I've never experienced it in a conference setting. And I know that it happens. I've heard people talk about it, but she was literally she was picking certain people out of the crowd. Like she was asking, for instance, like, does anybody know a Maria? And then she was like finding a Maria. And then she was like literally like talking to this Maria about like her husband and her frenemies. And like the people that I was with were like, what in the freak is she talking about? Like, how does she even know this shit? And I was like, bruh, I'm literally watching the one mind interact right now. This is cool as shit. Like, I'm in the middle of a movie. Like, this is so freaking cool to watch. And so, like, I feel like that's kind of what, in a way, kind of what we're talking about right now, of like what truly exists versus what doesn't exist. So it's like other people were watching this person go and pray over other people, and they were watching it as something outside of themselves. So they were watching miracles being performed by someone outside of themselves onto other people outside of themselves. And I think that also makes me think of Jesus Christ, and that like we've talked about this before, Ashley, that like people thought that, and thought that like Jesus was performing the miracles. I mean, he wasn't, the Holy Spirit was, but they thought that like something outside of them was bringing them miracles, when really like they were only able to receive that miracle because they themselves were aligned with it. Their miracle was only able to happen because the Holy Spirit within, like their self was aligned with that. And so I just think it's really interesting, because it's like, it's not that this external thing was picking external people for external reasons. It was that this alignment within her was aligned. The Holy Spirit was aligning her with like with the mind, and she was speaking from the mind knowledge that like she wouldn't have otherwise known whatsoever. And it was true, because nobody was denying her. They were all like, yeah, you're right. Like she was calling it out straight. So yeah, I feel like all of that to just say that like that was like a physical representation of the one mind of play. I was watching different people like I'm watching right now, but I actually got to experience what it's like to actually be in tune with that like one mindset. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, beautiful. And I'll be honest, immediately my judgment mind went in because Patrick and I went to a similar thing like that. And they're like, has anybody in here ever had a black lab? And there's thousands of people and millions of like, and it just turned into this fight over, no, they're talking to my dead black lab. And no, they're talking about, and it was like the most hilarious display of debauchery in the world. So that's where my judgment mind went. But but yes, I mean, it like, that's why there's people that can be psychic. That's why there's things such as remote viewing, because essentially the mind is doing all of this. It's just we've created all these barriers to the power of the mind. And we've like diminished our power over and over and over and over again, to the point that like this table can't tell me that I am Christ, because like I have put so many layers in the way. But yeah. Anybody have any other thoughts around judgment, or I know?
So I was thinking, because I've been doing or like reading the A Course in Miracles, and one of the things is like we've given everything we see and we think value. Like we're the ones who have given everything value. And this is kind of what Cassidy was saying about the like if we find something worthy of judgment or not. So I kind of went into the spiral in my head, and it's kind of stressing me out for some reason, but it's like if we've given everything value that we see or think, we're judging our own value that we've given things and that we've thought on things. And so like, why is it so hard to see that we're the cause and the judgment? And then if we're judging something that we've created, that's like shame and guilt. It just like adds on to each other. So there's this like spiral of we've given everything meaning, and now we're judging the meaning and the things that we've put on everything. If that makes sense.
No, it's beautiful, and it's a direct representation of how complicated the ego makes things to keep you so distracted. Could you imagine if you weren't thoughtful and bringing awareness, and you're just a person who's living in that cycle, how hard it is to get out of that cycle the longer you've been in it? I mean, I think it just is a testament to show how easily it is to get sucked in the chaos, but how simplistic it is, if that makes any sense, once you take a bird's eye view. Like when you think, and I'm wondering, Kaylee, tell me if I'm wrong, your mind is going down a rabbit hole and feeling discomfort when you imagine sitting in it, when you imagine being in that loop. But when all of a sudden you take the spirit approach and you're looking outside, you're like, oh, that's simple. Like, what the F? Look how simple that, because I heard that as you explained it to us. In one moment, I felt like chaos, like, oh my gosh, this is awful. And then another moment you were talking, I felt like, how ridiculous. Like, that is so simple. Is that like what you're feeling?
Yeah, kind of. I definitely have been switching back and forth between spirit and ego a lot, and judgment. Judgment's been like a big theme on my mind, just judging from other people's point of views, from judging my own art, comparison judgment, like judgment of I feel like every single kind of judgment that I can feel has been coming out. And we talked about this. I feel like it's because as I'm going further down the path of things, I think that I'm getting pullback from ego more so as I'm like realizing more things, and that I'm not this body, and that all these things are false. So it's like trying to solidify things more and pull me back. But yeah, there are moments when it's just like very laughable of observation, and the moments where it's so intellectualized in my head that it's like I don't know how to step outside or take responsibility, because the more I think of it, the more shame and guilt and layers are put on top of things.
Yeah. And I think that's the power of like the statement, I just is, or it just is, or God is. Like, I know early on for me in the course, that's when we came up with I just is because your mind, like the ego wants to pull you back into the analytical, intellectual, and that's where the rabbit holes get scary. That's where they get like, oh my gosh, so constricting. And when you, for me at least, when we use those statements, it's the moment of permission to stop analyzing and to know that deep internal feeling of truth is right, and we don't need to go any further. Because I feel like the ego tries to send you into these rabbit holes of constriction, And I say rabbit holes of constriction because there is like metaphysical rabbit holes that we go down that are helpful in the unwinding. But the constriction ones are the ones that you feel like, I'll never get out of this. Like, what is the purpose then? Like, this is too scary. I'm going to constantly be judging. And for me, I think that's really the moment when I was like, no more social media. That's when I was leaving, because I was working so hard on this judgment piece. Right? Working so hard and early on in the stages, because you still constantly do. And like David, he loves social media. He's like, I don't even know how many freaking social media accounts he has. And he's constantly he thinks it's the most glorious thing that Spirit has ever created in order for us to connect, which it has. But I had built my relationship out of judgment, right? My relationship I had with social media was fully in the ego and was in this place of judgment. And here I am trying to untie. And then I would go spend hours on social media where I'm faced with, like for you, Kaylee, faced with other people's art, faced with other people's businesses and where they are. And then it just would be like, oh, here's the ego. We're going back into judgment. And I will say, since I stepped away from social media is when my business really started to be Ashley's, really started to foster spirit and spirit guidance. And I was saying the other day, so when I found the Course in Miracles, I wanted a guru. I needed someone to worship, because that's how personal development had taught me, right? Like, you worship the ground Mel Robbins walks on, you worship, like you eat everything and anything they say and do. And I kept finding people that didn't fully align with the fundamentals of the course. And that's what I was looking for. And I was discouraged and discouraged and discouraged. And then Patrick and I are like, let's create our own community. Let's create that fundamental community and really foster it. And that's where we're at today. And once I finally got to that place of, oh, my guru is the Holy Spirit. Duh. Like, I don't need someone to work. I have Jesus in spirit, is when I found David Hoffmeister. And the reason why I think I didn't find him early on, not because he isn't plastered all over the internet. Like, I don't even know how many websites he has or Facebook sites, but because Spirit didn't allow me in that moment to find him, because I would have placed him on a pedestal and I would have never followed my own spirit, because I would have judged and I would have compared. Oh, I could never be like David. David is who I need to worship. Instead, by me stepping away, this was created. So that was a very long-winded answer to like how you can use form, or at least how I used form, to kind of, as walking sticks, to kind of manipulate. I know this sounds awful because it's everything the course tells you not to do. But early on for me, it was helpful to kind of manipulate my external surroundings to really just be able to hone in on hearing spirit and being guided by spirit instead of all the other noise. I don't know. That was really long-winded. Anybody have thoughts on that? Patrick is over here like falling asleep.
I think all of that was really special, though. I'm glad that you shared that, because I think that's like, I don't know, for me at least, I feel like, oh shoot, I just got a message from Spirit. I was going to say, for me at least, I feel like I can hear anything anybody says and like receive this or this from it. And then I was like, I feel like that was Spirit being like, well, that's me, and like, that's me telling you like what the actual like receiving is of what you're saying. But anyhow, all of that you just shared, though, I'm really glad that you just shared all of that, because I really connect with all of that as well. And oh, sorry, Spirit's coming through. So then judgment and worthiness. So Spirit would not let you know David before you went down this path yourself, because you would have judged David as worthy and would have judged him worthy to follow, to worship, to whatever. And now that you've gone down this path and you've had different views on worthiness, on what is true, what is not true, what is right, what is not right, content versus form, now that you understand content versus form, like you're able to actually be with it versus do with it. Because before, you would have seen David, you would have received his message and you would have felt like you had to do with it versus receiving the content that you receive now from it. I feel like you would have received more of the form before versus now you receive the content. And so I think like all that to say for all of us that like when we let go of judgment. And I love, Kaylee, how you mentioned like the different forms of judgment. There's so many different forms of judgment. And I also love what you shared too, because girl, if that's not what I've been in lately, I've been in that little like stuff, and it's been awful. So I'm just so Ashley, sorry, I'm just so grateful to be here with you guys. So thank you guys. But all that to say that, like, I think it's like it's coming back to that I just is. It's coming back to like following the flow of the content. It's coming back to trusting what you need. And so I think at one point when you worded like you had to manipulate the forms and you're like, oh well, that goes against the course. I just think it was like the word choice was just not quite lined up. I think like what you were really doing was like, for instance, so like we talk about how like when you trust the Holy Spirit and you forgive, for instance, sometimes there will be a reflection of that in the external, but there won't always be a reflection of that in the external. Or like maybe there is, but it's not in the way you expected it to be, so you're just not receiving that. And so sorry, I got to my brain just now when I saw Constantine go away, my brain just went, oh, I don't have any more thoughts. But yeah, I have no idea what I was saying. But yeah, all of that to say that thank you guys for sharing what y'all shared, because if what I just said was any proof, I've been all over the place. And so it's just been really nice to listen to y'all talk and hear other people's experiences of like coming back to what is, like remembering what is, being with what is, versus all that's out there, whether it's like looking for a guru or, you know, overcoming judgment or whatever it may be. It's just beautiful to know that kingdom of heaven is that peace, that I just is always possible in every moment. And that like this world or these forms, this experience is not always what is reality. Because I think sometimes I get in those spiral loops where I'm like, there's no way out of this and I'm gonna be like suffering forever. And it's just not the truth. So I just thank y'all for that remembrance.
Fully received. So much love, Cassidy. I always just love how like spirit just flows through you and gives you so much energy out of nowhere. It's just so beautiful. I just love it. So does anybody have any more thoughts like on the judgment piece? Otherwise, I would love to like slide into the I know mind, which is really pretty much very similar, same thing. Maybe just said differently. Thoughts?
I'm curious on how, like, let me word this. Okay. How I kind of talked about this with you before. It's like I can know truth and I can know that what I'm thinking is false, but I still fall down like the rabbit hole. It's like, okay, I know that I'm in judgment and I'm feeling loss or lack of love, and I know that that's not true and that I'm not that, and I can like see it, but I don't fully feel it. And sometimes I just glide into it and it's like I fully can understand and embody it. And sometimes I just linger in that feeling, even though I know that it's not the truth. And I don't think that I would consciously choose to sit in that if I had a choice. And I think I do have a choice, but I feel like I don't, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to hear if anybody else, but what I hear to begin with, Kaylee, is that you're placing weight on so many different things. So you're giving all these different things meaning. And like the I know exercise that we're doing in the group, one of the things it says at the very end is like all we're asking you to do is bring awareness. Bring awareness to the barriers. Bring awareness to the I know mind that's coming in. Like that's it. And I think our ego mind, the doer, wants to fix it, wants to change it, wants to do different. When in fact, I think it's more just about being in the awareness and not identifying with it. So I feel like, Kaylee, the second you start being like, I want to get out of these thoughts, you're only doing that because you've chosen to identify with the thoughts. You've chosen to be the thoughts, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it reminds me of that one video you made on The Chosen. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
On the body, like how we want to fix, like if we're sick, for example, we want to fix that. But what if that is the forgiveness lesson and it is supposed to be? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something that I've really dropped into lately is it's not about changing anything. And I think part of like my brain being so conditioned for a period of time of like conversations with God and I can manifest and create and have a vision board and it will like just really that God complex, the authority complex that actually the course talks about, where like I'm the puppet master here in the moment. So when we get into that state, I don't know, I just drew a blank. I don't even know how that goes with that. But it did in that moment. Different moment. Does that feel complete, Kaylee? Just kidding.
I mean, yeah, I think it goes back to, like you said, not identifying with it. My own judgment comes up even when I think of that, because then I'm thinking, oh, am I doing it right? Am I doing it wrong? We've had a discussion about this before. I feel like this is a very common thing. It's like, oh, really, you can't do anything wrong, but then even judging my observance of things.
Yeah.
Kathy, it looks like you had something that came up.
You can go ahead.
It's just very short. It's not going to be a rant like normal. So the other day I was talking to my brother, and my brother made a comment that just like really sat with me that I just kept thinking about, and it was very simple to the point, and it said, no matter what you do, it is the right thing. No matter what you do, it is the right thing. And I like just kept thinking about that and like the word choices too, like no matter what you're doing with the matter, it is the right thing. It's like, don't focus on the form, focus on the content. Trust that the Holy Spirit is guiding you and that you are doing the right thing. And that, like, I don't know. So I don't know if that connected at all, but I just, when you were saying all that, I was like, whoa, like I literally just had someone say something similar to me recently. So.
You have something? You're over here laughing like crazy.
I was just laughing at the no matter.
Oh, the no matter.
And then doing what you do. But I had something else and I forgot that. I have to think about it again.
Do you remember what you wanted to say?
Yeah. So what I think you were trying to say, Ashley, was
Thanks, Tommy. You picked up my thought.
was that we truly, that it's all we can control is our perception. So it's like we're watching the movie, like in one of your videos, watching the movie with the popcorn and watching with Jesus and with the Holy Spirit. And yeah, it was a really good video. And seeing it from that perspective where maybe it's not your choice. Maybe it's just something that is happening and all you can do is be in it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's why there is no right and wrong decision.
It just is. It's yes. And to take that a step further, Tommy, you said it's not your choice, but it is. That's the biggest problem, is like the mind created all of this. So Constantin and I have had a conversation before, and I think I brought it to some of you in Patreon about like, Kay left. Oh, it is so weird when someone drops off. It does like steal you. Oh my gosh. I'm not supposed to talk. Like, I think I'm just supposed to be done. Who wants to talk next?
I'll go ahead. I think a lot of the predicaments that we find ourselves with studying the courses, we have to intellectualize, and then we just have to be. And then I was actually having a conversation with Ashley yesterday about how I would like to get away from the intellectualization of the course, because that's all coming from the ego point of view, because it has to, because we're form and we have to come from the ego. But to get away and then just focus on more the being part. And that's the end goal, essentially, is to just be. But first, we have to stand in the ego to a certain point for a certain period of time to be able to understand what the being part is. But
yeah. And I think one time, I think it was Ken, I don't know who said this, but one time someone said that like the biggest issue that course students run into is wanting to be perfect course students. And if you're at that space, then you need to throw the book out the window because the book is doing nothing. The course we learn is just as real as my phone. So at the end of the day, this is just a walking stick. And the second you turn it into crutch, you need to throw it away or take a break and come back, because then you've completely lost what the course is trying to tell you, and it's not helping you, it's actually harming you. And I was on a podcast yesterday with a woman, and I brought that up about meditation, how much people like beat themselves up in meditation. I was one of these people, because my mind, if you can only imagine, has been my biggest forgiveness lesson in wrangling it. You know, I vision myself like with a rope trying to get cattle, which is almost impossible. But in meditation, so many people are like, I can't meditate. Or they go into it and they're frustrated because all these thoughts come in and they're told that's not how it's supposed to go. And then, you know, they just get into this negative mindset. And of course they're in judgment and all this. Well, don't meditate then. Please do not, because it's literally doing the opposite of what it's supposed to. And it's actually like cultivating your ego, and it's actually feeding your ego. Your ego's using it as an opportunity to judge and to create shame and guilt because you can't do something. So I think that's the big piece with the course as well, is like, this is just meant to be a walking stick of unwinding. It's not meant to carry weight per se. It's meant to bring remembrance. And technically, when you get to the end of the workbook lessons, I don't want to ruin it for anyone. If you plan to do it, you spend a whole year, at least 365 days doing them. And then it says, well, your journey's just begun. And you're like, huh? What? But like, if that's the case, this isn't the end all be all. And I think that's how we get, you know, so wrapped up in religion, which is a different conversation, because we think that's the end all be all and it's the answers to everything, when you have your answers within. So I don't know, I'm going off on a tangent. So yeah, let's go to the I know mind. So Evelina, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I guess I am. And you could say no if you don't want to share, but you brought up that you wanted to talk more about the I know mind. Was there anything in particular that like is burning inside of like, let's talk about this?
Yeah, no, this is just, I guess for starters, I'll say I'm soaking all this in, and I shared with you, Ashley, like the whole language around all of this is new to me. Like like my mind is trying to conceptualize and understand this. It's like judgment, forgiveness, and ego and spirit. And so like I'm conscious of that in real time. And I'm like, hold on, like just reminding myself to like pull back and be like, it's simple. It's simple, Evelina. But this is, I think, exactly why I'm having such a hard time with this I know exercise, because I'm so used to always feeling like I know. And it's just been a couple days, but it has been so wild to observe how much like the I knowing, but the control specifically just shows up in all aspects. And even on the first day, and I shared in the group in that memo of like, I surrendered. I was talking to myself in the car. I was driving because I didn't know what decision to make. And I'm like, okay, spirit, like I really don't know. So like, tell me what to do. And I'm like, okay, I've surrendered. But then I'm like attaching, I don't even know how to explain this. It's almost like I over attached with the surrender. And there's just like a safety that I get with this certainty or this convincing of myself as though I know what's going on. So I don't know what it is, but the fear that comes up for me of just utter surrender and just trusting everything that is unfolding. I mean, I've grappled with this for a bit, but this is like, it's like blatantly apparent to me right now, where it's like, it is really something that has like a grip in all these areas of my life. But also on that note too, is just being conscious of releasing the shame and guilt that's attached to that, and staying open and curious to understanding like how to just be more at peace with this, because it brings up so much emotion, like anxiety for me of just like the wanting to know. So that's a little bit of a long-winded brain dump, but those are some of the feelings I've been navigating this week.
What he said about
Yeah.
out of control.
No. So, I mean, I think it's one of the like greatest tricks of the ego is the I know. it's like what essentially kind of got us here is that like we know how to create, so let's go create and create better. So like I brought up Jacob Collier earlier, and he has created like the most amazing music ever because he has thrown out the need for certainty, the imagination of what certainty may come in the moment, and it's just created amazing like new ways of music. And I think when it comes to this I know mind, we literally use it all day, right? Like we're only all on here because we assumed we knew how to log it. Like I didn't send anyone instructions. I used my I know mind that you guys all I know to do this, right? So we're constantly assuming, which is like the judgment mind that Tommy brought up, that everybody has an I know mind and they can I know like I know, right? So it's like you're always using it. So it's like this whole new level of wow. But I think back to a kid, and I said this the other day as well. I said, you know, go spend a day with a 2-year-old. I think I said 6-year-old, but 2-year-old would be way better. Spend a day through their eyes, and I promise you that you will get way more than giving Tony Robbins $150,000 to spend a week with him. Because that is where we're trying to get. They literally, their I know mind hasn't been built enough yet. They haven't retained enough experience and interactions for that to be like fully taking over. Yes, even at 2, they could have experienced some traumas. Their I know mind is already starting to be built from the second they come out. I think of twins. If a woman has twins, a lot of times they use bracelets to put on the twins to make sure they feed them. So my question is like, did that child actually need to eat? Or did we make it believe it needed to eat in order to survive, right? So that's an I know. It's another I know that this child needed to eat. And then we make this child believe that it needs to eat. And then it creates this, I know I need to eat when I feel hungry. I know what that feeling inside is. That's hunger, right? So it keeps getting deeper and deeper and deeper of this like unraveling back. And that's why when you think of the table, like Evelina, how many I knows would you have to go through in a table before it could tell you you're Christ? Like I tried to last night start thinking of all the I knows that are wrapped up in a table, and like I got frustrated because it's too many. It was too many in the moment for me to do, and it was so overwhelming because it's not just the surface level things. It is so many layers even deeper before it gets to that place of what it truly is, which is here to remind you of your truth. I don't know if that made like I think I went off like all over the freaking place, but
Yeah, no, I love this. It's I think for me it's just so interesting because again, I shared with you, Ashley, this is I'm allowing myself to be so open to this new what do I even call it? I think I keep referring to it as a philosophy, but I don't even know if that's the right word for it. This approach, this mindset, this perspective, perception. And it's funny because there's the ever curious part of Evelina that's always questioning and knowing, or wanting to know. Here I go again, but just like wanting to understand or deeper. But this is how do I articulate this? I guess it's just it's so fresh for me still that I'm trying to just allow myself to, I guess, invite this new perspective again and see it in a new light. But there's like deeper questions because again, I want to understand it all, but I don't think that's the point. Or I guess, is there a balance of like welcoming this in, and then reaching like a level of that peace of, and maybe that surrender of like, okay, it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, it's scary. It's a shedding of all of our defenses. I mean, that like it's like an internal defense, right? So the I know is the mind. I feel like it's almost easier with the external sometimes, like, oh, I'm not a body, but to fully integrate that in your mind, it has to remove some of these other barriers. And David says everything we have learned is a defense against the light. Everything. Like, can you imagine? Everything we have learned is a defense against the light. And I don't know if you guys have felt this, but sometimes when I get close to the light, I can feel the barriers. I can literally physically feel them within and push me back away. And sometimes I can lean in and make it through, and sometimes I can't. And it's just this remembrance of like, oh, those are the barriers. The moments where I literally can feel this stuckness. It's really about emptying the mind. I did the Peaceful Warrior, and we talk all the time that the Course in Miracles is just one of the thousands of ways to get there, to this remembrance. And the Peaceful Warrior would take more of like a Buddhist approach. I don't know. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what Dan Millman, he even quotes the Course sometimes too, but essentially it's about clearing the mind, which is removing all of the crap you have, like all of it. And the second you're like, oh, I'm going to remove my I know mind around this, but not this, then you negated both. Does that make sense? Like, you can't pick and choose. It's all or nothing, because really there is no all. Because none of the things you've learned have actually existed. But one cool thing, because I always talk about curiosity and how curiosity, I think, saved the cat and didn't kill the cat. Is I've never differentiated when I say that. Like, I'm just like, curiosity. And last night, David in his talk differentiated, and he said, curiosity can be either awful or wonderful. If you are getting curious about the world, which is like science and all that stuff, that will go on forever. Period. It will. It's a circle. It's constant, because it's not truth. So there is no final answer. It can be ever changing based on the mind and whatever. But the true curiosity that is the powerful one, the one that actually matters, is the curiosity into self. That is spirit-led, that deep self-actualization, that deep self-awareness. So when we do practices like the I know mind, which we haven't said, this is in David's book, This Moment Is Your Miracle. It's a really beautiful exercise if anybody's listening. But in the I know exercise, that the ego is going to go crazy, because you are literally going to the root of where everything is. So we had a recommendation come up. But can I share, Evelina, like a little bit about what happened with the gift of maybe? So Evelina, you've really been on this journey of like no longer seeking answers outside of yourself. You saw that as even though you thought you had moved through it, that it still very much was present. Like, I have a question, I need an answer, give it to me. So Evelina literally came in the group and kind of had this aha moment, but wanted to know how to decipher the judgment, like the I know, like which is right, which is wrong. And she literally asked in the group, like, hey, tell me, Ashley, how do I do this? And I came back with reflective questions, because first of all, I'm not going to feed that. And second of all, I don't know, right? Like, I'm still figuring this out. And for me, may look different than and feel different than you. And another participant recommended The Gift of Maybe, which is an amazing book. And I would recommend that anytime outside of this. But the problem is, we met your I know mind with I needed to know with an answer. So we just fed it. If you would have gone and used the gift of maybe to answer your question, you would have lacked the confidence that you can actually find the answers within. And you would have then repeated that cycle of like, oh, now this is what the I know is like, I don't know anything, but if I want to know, it can be provided to me, which is just the same, because you're trying to find out that there is none.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for bringing this up, Ashley, because it is so interesting and such a beautiful reminder too of the little ways, like the sneaky little ways that this continues to kind of come up. But you're absolutely right. It is I forget how you just said it. What was it? It was like if you really want to know, then you what is it, figuring you can figure it out on your own or just ask to have the guidance.
Yeah.
Whatever you're insinuating with that, I think for me is just such a powerful reminder of the little moments where I'm still outsourcing and looking for that thing or that person or that situation to give me the answer without tuning into myself to do that.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
think another big powerful thing, I want to open it up so I don't keep talking, but I want to share one thing is that, and we always need answers, but the problem is that's the ego. The ego is the one that needs answers. It needs understanding. It needs like, help me with it needs that. So I think this exercise also is meant to help us be okay with sitting in the I don't know, because that's where the light is. Because if what David says is correct, which I believe it is, everything we have learned is a defense against the light. That means we got to get really comfortable with not knowing anything if we want to make our way back to the light, because it's not going to be, well, there is the holy instant, so you could argue against, but I believe we will experience a journey of this, of removing the barriers. So sitting in the I don't know, even though you still have things you know and you haven't fully been enlightened, is going to be what you're going to experience. So it's going to be very uncomfortable. And if you immediately go seek the answers, then you're just putting more layers on. You're placing more defenses. You're learning more things that are holding you from the light. It just happens to be a different thing, right? You played like you didn't know when you already had 50 personal development books that filled this narrative. But let's pretend I don't know and let's go read 50 new ones. Like you literally just filled it with a different source. Anybody have thoughts? Kay, do you have any thoughts? Has spirit led you? And I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you'll tell me if you don't feel like it.
I can share. I'm not sure how helpful it'll be, but the text says the ego analyzes and Holy Spirit accepts. And we are so conditioned to analyzing information to find meaning when the Holy Spirit says that analyzing is actually an attack on meaning. What we're analyzing are projections, and projections are illusions, and illusions have no meaning. And what does have meaning is what God has given us. And when we go to analyze, we're breaking down, we're separating. And the reason why it's an attack on meaning is because what has meaning is what has been given to us by Holy Spirit, by God. And so it's an attack on God and Holy Spirit, essentially. And so when you think about it in that way, the Holy Spirit said to me, economy of language. If you think about everything that you want to analyze for meaning, and you, instead of going through with that analyzing and indulging the ego, if you stopped and accepted, like you were saying, just being aware of your reactions, being aware of your interpretations, being aware of your fears and anxieties and your need to know, what is there left to say in the conversation? What is there left to say? That's all I got.
That was so beautiful, Kay. Thank you. I mean, that was so just a reminder. It's like you literally just put a period on everything. And that's what I think this is. And I love to intellectualize things. I love to analyze things. I think that's a way of survival I had as a child, like to the extreme. But I also love to ask questions. So for me, I think it's been an opportunity to give permission that I don't need to do that, because it was a survival, the analyzing. So like you sharing the reality of like there is no conversation to even be had. I mean, yes, we have to along the way, but in the end there is none. Just period. It just is. God is done. So maybe from now on we're just going to sit on the calls in silence for an hour. Patrick said we need to bring more spirit in, and Kay just reminded me that we should not even be talking about any of this shit, and we just need to sit here quiet. I'm just kidding. I love it though.
That's not what I meant. That's not what I meant.
But really, like at the end of the day, I think people have like, what's that when you like make something real? They've taken those words and they've made it like that's how you have to get there, is through just complete silence. And like silence meditation, you know, what's that one called? We had a friend that went to one where she was silent for like 10 days straight. Oh, Vipassana. Vipassana. Which is beautiful. But David, like I think it was David. No, maybe it was Ken. But anyway, there was this the creators of Vipassana who literally studied it and did it for years and years and years, ended up finding their way to the course because they realized that yes, the silence metaphysically, they were able to go to these places, but then they didn't know what to do with it. Like they continued to try and revisit and revisit and revisit, but ultimately you need something at the end. You can't just metaphysically untie everything and then not have an understanding of what's there, if that makes sense. Like the end game, you know, Tommy and I talk about the start being at the beginning or the ending being back at the start line. Like the same thing, like you have to have a purpose. And that was one thing they realized. So I think people do create that, like, oh, the silence, or it just is, there is no more conversation, as like an ego's way again of being like, oh, just do that. And then it creates shame and guilt because it's pretty much impossible to just do that because there's so much darkness within when you finally get quiet and you don't know what to do with it. I had a woman come to me recently who's been doing shadow work. And she's just like in this super dark space because the problem is she's been doing the uncovering that shadow work teaches. And so she's got a crap ton of awareness of how awful a lot of these behaviors she has and where they've come from. But she never released. She would just move on to the next one. So it's just awareness after awareness after awareness with no understanding of releasing the weight. Yeah, I don't know why I was going with her.
I don't know. I don't think it's so much being silent as much as being mindful of the conversation that you have with Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
I don't think it's about being silent because it's not your words, it's your thoughts that's what's being projected. So you can be silent, but whatever thoughts that are happening, like that's the problem. That's the root of the issue. Because that's where the conflict is. And conflict is, as the text says, conflict is the root of all evil. So I think it's a matter of knowing or speaking the language that Holy Spirit needs us to speak. And it's not the language of the ego, but it's the language of love. So it's not the language of fear, but it's the language of love that we're needing to speak to Holy Spirit because that's what Holy Spirit understands. Like he works with us within the illusion, but when we're coming because we have a need or whatever, it's just being mindful of the space that you're, the perspective, the thought system that you're coming from, and speaking that language. And I think when you're speaking the language through the thought system of love, that it's very different than the language that you're going to speak through the thought system of fear. So I think
Oh.
that's kind of where Holy Spirit was going with that.
Mhm.
Not accepting that the illusion is the illusion and shifting that perspective and speaking
Yeah.
through the perspective of love instead of the fear.
Yeah. It's that's exactly it. And I still can't think of the word of what people, they were taking it like literally. Oh, that was what I was thinking of, like literally. So people were being silent. And I think when you bring that up, it brings us full circle back to the I know mind and to the judgment, because the language, even though we use the word language, doesn't mean spoken, like you said, Kay. It's what you're thinking in your mind is what is projected. So, and if we go back, like, they say in the times of Atlantis, they didn't use words, they were telepathic, and words are made by man, so they were made by the ego. But if we think, it's the judgment and the I know mind, because the language of the spirit is that of love. And if we allow the language of the spirit to fully be present in everything, I think it takes us back to the what David said about this table would say, you are Christ. It would tell you the language of the spirit because you were speaking it. And then I think this goes into the mirrors that you were talking about, Tommy, of like, if we aren't coming fully from the spirit, we can't fully receive the spirit. If that makes sense. You have any thoughts? We are over the hour. Does anybody have any like final burning thoughts to share in regards to this, or like just like anything, I guess?
This was so beautiful. Thank you guys. I do have to jump. But I'm so excited I got to join, and I'm looking forward to all the Sundays. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Evelina. So great. Anybody else have anything final they want to say? Tommy, you got your hand up.
I'll say one thing really quick. I think what's important to think about is that it's maybe not so much our thoughts, but the weight of our thoughts and where we place them. Because I feel like thoughts are bound to come, like we're bound to think about things negatively or positively. And it's about looking at that as is rather than trying to like dilute them or push them down. Because I feel like that is what amplifies the ego.
Oh, I agree with that, and I think it's not about pushing or judging as much as it's about just being aware. So I mean, we're going to have those thoughts, like you said, because we are in conflict, but thoughts, forgiving those thoughts, and allowing yourself to be in a space to hear from Holy Spirit. It's Holy Spirit can only come through when we create the space, when the space is created for Holy Spirit, because it's definitely not about pushing or attacking or anything like that, because those thoughts are gonna be there, but it is a matter of having the awareness and doing the forgiveness and creating that space so that you can hear.
Yeah. Haley, did you have something?
Yeah, Tommy and I were talking yesterday about like a person who worries about money and how they're like, oh, if I just get this much, I'll be fine. And then they get that much, and then the worry turns into another thing. And I was thinking of this in my own circumstances too, of like, we have this thing in our mind of like, oh, this is a problem, this is bothering me. But really, the outside projection of that thing, like if money is the thing that's bothering me, the money's not the problem. That's a projection in the physical world of the deeper problem, which is lack or loss of love or not feeling whole or complete. And something Tommy said sparked it, and something you said sparked it earlier, Ash, but I didn't fully like get it. But it was like, I've been thinking about, I have all these things, and then I'm trying to work all through these things individually of like things externally around money, around the weight that I put on money, the weight that I put on relationships, the weight that I put on these external things. But really, it's, if you get the core of the problem, those things dissipate. So with thoughts, I feel like I try to work through things individually, but I feel like it talks about this in The Power of Now too. It's like, those things don't matter once you've come home. All these individual things don't matter once you come home to everything. And the core of it, which is very simple, which goes back to a video you sent me earlier this week by
Ken Wapnick. Was it by
Yeah.
Ken? The purpose one or the pleasure one, I mean?
Yeah, about basically the answer and the conclusion is always the same. And it's not about the specifics or the weight that we put on. Like, I was talking about, like, the force of making yourself go to the gym and the force of drinking is the same force. There's no difference in weight if it's coming from the ego. So really, the problem's always ego and the answer's always spirit.
Yeah. Super simple.
And I would add, we are already home.
Yes, Tommy. Thank you for the reminder. We are already home.
We're already home.
We're just watching this movie that, you know, I just love that when I think about it because I love popcorn, but Kay, she likes cassava chips. So she eats those. But when you just sit back and yeah, maybe sometimes it's the crappy movie you didn't choose to see, but if you realize like, I don't have to identify with it. I'm still enjoying my popcorn and sitting with Jesus. You know, it's such just a relief. And that's the reminder that we're already home. Like you're watching this from the end. This has already all occurred and you don't need to identify. And I think that's, you know, with the thought piece, Tommy, is like when you identify, you allow that mouse to turn into a monster instead of just observing it and seeing it go. Yeah. And like when you put the second you said specifics, Kaylee, like just that word alone, if we're describing anything, means we've placed weight on it. Like a money thought is more important. And I know we're in relation with everything. And the ultimate relationship we're working on is the relationship of self, the big S, right? The one. So the more you work on that, every other relationship in your life starts to fall into or appears to fall into place, right? In this illusion. So that means literally relationship with everything: alcohol, drugs, money.
Yeah, all the separations with money, trying to fill it with alcohol or whatever it is just a lack of. It's a initial separation also, and just trying to fill that wholeness. And you're trying to fill the wholeness either through another person or an external object, such as money or alcohol or whatever it is. But that's not the root of the problem, like you were saying. It's Kaylee, that once you acquire the money, the person still has the problem because they didn't address that wholeness they're lacking, which is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Biggie Smalls said it perfectly. Mo money, mo problems. Mic drop. Cassidy or Joseph, would you like to say anything before we close out our live?
Just thank you all for your time and your thoughts, and I've enjoyed this and been marinating on it all silently, and things unexpectedly kind of like spoke to me, and so just thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being here, and so wonderful to meet you.
Thank you.
I got plenty of thoughts, but I'll keep them.
You don't have any thoughts, Cassidy? That can't be.
I had plenty of thoughts throughout what everybody was saying, but I have little thoughts for like for everybody, what everyone was saying, and we don't have that kind of time, so I'll just keep them to myself. And the Holy Spirit will. We're all one mind, so I don't need to give anything out there. It's fine.
Well, I'm so grateful for everyone being here. Again, if you tune in and you want to join us the first and third Sunday of the month, the first Sunday of the month is private, does not go live. The third is live on YouTube. And yeah, it's the Big Miracle Energy Patreon. And this is just a safe space for us to get curious. And, you know, a lot of times we talk about the course and sometimes the Bible's brought up and we're just getting internally curious, not about the world. We know the world's junk. All right. Constantine, you want to pull us off the live? I think Constantine's here somewhere. I hope so. He's got full control over us being live right now. Let's see. I can maybe toggle something. I guess we can.
Just you can hit leave up there.
Then I would leave.
Oh.
The actual thing.
Oh, you're.
All right. Well, there's Constantine. We're done, Constantine.